Hi there, welcome to Cardinal Craze. I'm your host, Alucard, and joining us on the show today is special guest, Senior Deputy Editor of Card Chronicle, Keith Wynne. How you doing down there, Keith?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no, of course. We enjoy having everybody on who wants to talk some Louisville football, and we appreciate you coming out to being able to talk about Louisville and what's going on. All right, so one of the first things we want to do is just make sure you're doing okay, that the coronavirus hasn't hit you or your family or anything like that.
No, we're good. I had a scare with some extended family, but everybody's good and healthy. My family's good. Kids are good. So, just adjusting to life with, all of this and, doing the best we can do.
Yeah, of course. And glad to hear that everyone's doing all right except for the scare.
Yeah.
But outside of that, you're doing good, and we're glad to hear it. So one of the things that we're going to talk about on this show is the Louisville schedule, the direction of the Louisville program, recruiting, our favorite players. But we're going to first start with the schedule. So Louisville opens up with a home opener on Thursday night, September 3rd, against NC State. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's probably the best situation for this team, starting year two with a conference game, being able to start with a team that they beat last year and also a team that's kind of rebuilding on their own. There were some real questions of whether or not it could be Clemson that they started off with. We all saw the Notre Dame game last year. Obviously, they took that loss. Didn't really kill the season or anything like that, but I think being able to start off with a team where they can be confident going and playing is a big plus. Because I do think there's a potential for this season to really continue or stay at the same level or potentially grow, as opposed to maybe taking a step back, which some teams do in year two. So NC State has new coordinators on both sides of the ball. We all saw how poorly their offense was with their quarterback play last year. Their defense had all these injuries, and then they lost a lot of those guys. They're better players, some of them to the NFL. So, I think that NC State's going to have a rough season, and I think it's a good thing that Louisville's going to be able to come in and I think they have more confidence. You have a lot of guys coming back from both sides of the ball for Louisville. Coaching staff was able to hold tight. So, on paper, it seems like a really good situation. And I think having a conference win to start the season would be great.
Yeah, no, most definitely. All right. I guess then we move on to week 2 versus Clemson at Death Valley. What are your expectations for that game?
I think whenever you talk about Clemson, it's always about what they can do. You don't really feel – you never really go into any game with Clemson thinking like, oh, well, Louisville will be able to do this. It's really what can Clemson do and what maybe they might struggle with. And then can you maybe take advantage of it? And then you kind of sit back and you go through the depth chart and you're like, well, there's not really much you can really take advantage of. So I think Clemson's offense, they've got to replace a couple offensive linemen. That's really about it. So from the offensive side of the ball, Jeff Scott left to be the head coach of South Florida. He was their co-offensive coordinator, but it's pretty widely known that Tony Elliott is the play caller, really more of the guy that kind of the rankings on offense. So they have pretty much everybody back. Trevor Lawrence is back. Travis Etienne decided to not go to the NFL for whatever reason, and now we got to deal with them again. And they've been recruiting so well on the offensive side of the ball. They're really now at the point that instead of having a Deshaun Watson and a couple of guys out wide, or maybe a running back, and having they've got 4 and 5 stars everywhere on offense now. So I think they'll still be really good on offense. Louisville started that game off this past year really well with confusing Trevor Lawrence in the passing game. He threw those interceptions. Brian Brown had a really good game plan to start their passing attack, but the running game just went wild. And a lot of that, I think, is just still to the fact that they don't have the guys that they need up front to be able to really handle a good running game. But, I think the question with Clemson is actually going to be on the other side of the football. I think they're going to be young on defense. I think they're going to go back to their traditional 4-3 look that we saw when Lamar played against them. They had those 4 NFL defensive linemen. They got away from that last year, and I think they're going to be able to go back to that. But I think they've lost some key guys. They're going to be young in the secondary. They have 2 new safeties they're going to be playing. They're going to have a new cornerback. They've got new linebackers. They've got a couple new defensive linemen. So that's a lot of that's younger guys that you're maybe hoping that, hey, Louisville can take advantage of all these new guys, these new faces. Brent Venables is a great defensive coordinator. But I do think that you have to kind of look at, hey, maybe there's a potential for them to really be able to pass ball well on these new defensive backs. Maybe the pass rush isn't as good as it was because last year their pass rush wasn't what it was when they had those defensive linemen. So if they're going to go back to that, they don't have the Christian Wilkins and the Dexter Lawrence, those first-round guys. They might get there at some point, but they're not there yet. So there might be a potential for Louisville to maybe hang in a little bit better. But I until Clemson somehow or another stumbles, they're the class. You know, you just kind of go into that game and just hope that you could at least make it close or keep it close late and maybe still a close game or a win like North Carolina did last year. But you know, it's Clemson, man. They're just a buzzsaw right now. You know, I think that a guy like Lawrence, you know, I would be surprised if he comes back and part of it becomes not just his draft stock, but also the potential of the more and more film you put out there as a prospect now, the more and more it gets picked apart. So when you look at guys like Joe Burrow, who really had 2 years of production to be able to pick apart, you go back to Mitch Trubisky, only had that 1 year in North Carolina. Those guys are becoming actual commodities now because they don't have so much to break down, you know, and it used to be more of you want a guy like Peyton Manning who started for 4 years and you know exactly what you're getting. For whatever reason in the NFL, it's kind of flipped now with quarterbacks where it seems like the less you play, the better off you are. And you know, I don't know, the NFL is a weird place, you know, so it's kind of hard to know why. But if you're Lawrence, maybe coming back that extra year, you're potentially hurting your draft stock, and I think that's really what those guys kind of worry about, you know.
That's true. And one of the things that a lot of fans are going to, you know, probably comment in is when if you stay longer, there's higher risk of getting injured and not being able to actually be drafted because of your injury. I mean, look at Tua Tagovailoa. You know, I mean, he dealt with, what was it, a knee injury or ankle injury?
Knee, ankle, and hip.
Knee, ankle, and hip.
Yeah.
You know, and his draft stock was really high though. You know, and he just got drafted, I believe it was, to the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah.
And well, they needed it. The Dolphins really needed a quarterback.
Yeah. You know, but Tua is a guy that, you know, without those injuries, maybe he's competing for that first spot. So, you know, you know, it's all kind of fickle, and you you throw in the fact of the draft order. Maybe the first 3 or 4 teams don't need a quarterback, which, you know, as of right now, you know, it's looking pretty good unless something kind of changes with retirements and things like that. They're saying that, you know, the top 3 or 4 teams, you know, might not need a quarterback. And if you're Trevor Lawrence, you might say, hey, maybe I do wait a year, you know, and I can get that number 1 spot, which, you know, like I said, it's you look at the financial aspect, you look at the marketability aspect, all those things play into some guys. Some guys that doesn't matter at all. You know, it's just, it all depends on the guy. So, you know, it's kind of, you know, when Travis Etienne decided to come back, that was a shock to everybody. I mean, he was the number 1 back for a lot of those draft scouts. Or at least the top 2 or 3. And staying longer as a running back typically just means you're going to put more wear and tear in your body. And when you're doing that, all it does is potentially shorten your career. And some, like I said, some guys that matters. That's a big deal. Some other guys, it's not. Mississippi State, when Louisville played them in the bowl game, Kylan Hill decided to play, even though he'd announced he was going to leave. Ended up getting hurt on the first or second play of the game, and then he decided to stay when he was a guy that was going to get drafted. So you never know, and it's kind of interesting because you never know what motivates these guys on their decision. But to me, it's, you know, do what's best for you and hope that it all works out, I guess, you know. Yep.
So I guess we move on to week 3, which is on September 19th, and it is against Murray State, I believe at home. Do we really I mean, Murray State has struggled the past couple of years to even make it to even appear. I don't think they've been able to make it to a bowl game, honestly.
I think Murray lost their coach a couple of years ago, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, and I think he ended up down at Samford. They're kind of middle of the pack program, or, you know, at their level. And yeah, I think that the big thing this year compared to last year is when they get to these games, they need to be able to play their backups. Last year, honestly, the last couple of years, they haven't been able to do that. And, you know, especially with the new – it's not new anymore, but the redshirt rule where you can play guys for 4 games, and they can still redshirt,
Mm-hmm.
you've got to be able to utilize that.
Yeah.
And they weren't really able to do that much last year or the year before. That's something that going forward, when you play these games, they call them bye games because you're paying the other school to come play you. You've got to be able to utilize that time to get your freshman in the game, your backup guy that you want a redshirt, but you need to make sure you get some game reps and meaningful game reps. It's not going to be a close game or anything like that, but meaningful game reps mean that not just, hey, in the fourth quarter when they're just running the football and the wide receivers are out there just blocking. You want to get them in the game maybe in the third quarter, maybe even earlier if possible, and get them into the actual real offense or the real defensive sets and give them an opportunity to grow. And Louisville has a lot of young guys on this team, especially the freshmen, that they need to get them some experience. Because the worst thing you can do is have a guy sit the entire year and never see the field when you have this option to play them 4 games. I mean, if you're wasting that, that's not ideal. And I think that Murray State game, especially early in the season, I think that's an opportunity to get those guys in the game.
Yeah, no, most definitely. That's honestly, I mean, I expect the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we move on to game number 4 on September 26th, if it still happens. I know I'm saying these dates out here, but Lord knows if this is even going to happen on this specific day. Okay, we got Western Kentucky, I believe, at home as well.
Yeah, I think Western's good. Western had actually a much better season than I think most people realized last year. They ended up winning, if I'm remembering correct, 7 or 8 games last year. They went to a bowl game. Their new coach last year was a big step up. Tyson Helton, I believe, came from Tennessee as their offensive coordinator, if my memory serves me. He really maximized what they had. They had some veteran players at the skill spots on offense, and they did really well there. And honestly, their defense was a lot better than I realized personally, because I looked back at their defense because their defensive coordinator was a potential fit for NC State. He coached there before, played there at some point, I believe. So I was kind of looking at their defensive numbers, and I watched some of their games because, why not? I was bored. And they have a really good scheme. They've got a couple really good players. Western's been really good about getting transfers. They've got a couple former 4-star guys down there. They've got some local guys down there that are pretty good, and they kind of do a good job of mixing all those guys together because they end up not having some of the depth issues that a lot of small schools have because they bring transfers, and then they also have their own recruiting base. So it's a good way to kind of backfill positions. And so, they might lose a guy at linebacker, but they can bring in another guy that they got in from all, that playing there and is, hey, looking for an opportunity. So, so in, Western Kentucky on offense, they really do be able to do well with Tyson Helton taking over and utilizing those skill position guys they have. And then, they recruit speed. And it's similar to the point that the first thing they're looking for is, can you run? And if you can run, they can work in trying to develop you. So he was able to take over a program that had done pretty well. They still had some Brahms guys that were left over as veterans. They had some guys that they were able to bring in as transfers. Had some guys from all over the state of Kentucky that they've taken a chance on and really worked to develop. And a lot of Louisville guys, that's one thing. They're maybe a little undersized, but they can run. And when you have guys that can run, you're in better shape than most. So I'm really interested in that game. I think that, last year, Louisville pretty much was in control of the game the whole game, but it was a little bit closer than what we'd maybe want to see. I would love to see them be able to, turn that into, maybe a big win, a big blowout win. But I think it's good competition. I think it helped them last year. Mikael Cunningham was able to play pretty well and kind of get the ball rolling last year. I think we can see a similar thing where guys maybe kind of step up and get better, and it's more polished. There was a real turning point in last year's season, that game, because you started to see the offense start to do things a little bit better. So I think it's going to be a good game. I don't see it as a question of whether or not Louisville will win it or not, but I do think it'll be a little bit more, maybe closer than what we'd want it to be.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I think at this point in the season we would be 3-1 with potential loss at Clemson, only because Brian Brown has mentioned that depth is not where it should be for defense. He said there's still some positions they need to fill. I remember he did a press conference a while back. It was after a practice. I think it was probably one of the first 7 practices they had. He'd mentioned that in the third year, depth should be a lot better.
Yeah, yeah, and
Which,
it's just it goes back to kind of they weren't really balanced from a recruiting standpoint under Petrino. They had too many wide receivers, not enough offensive linemen. Too many secondary guys, not enough defensive linemen. So they've been trying to work out. I think they've really done well with the offensive line. They're bringing in. I think they had 6 guys in this last class. They're looking at 5 guys in this class. They brought in a couple grad transfers to help out. So they've been able to do there, but on the defensive side of the ball, they're still struggling to really get to where they need to be. I like the kind of the transparency of just saying, hey, we're not there. It's not an excuse as much as it's just a reasoning. When you see them struggle here and there, it's like, well, we're not making an excuse. We should have made that play. But when you look at the whole scheme of things, yeah, we still got a ways to go at getting guys. So I think, kind of off subject, but, you look at the recruiting right now on the defensive side of the ball, they've really done well with these first few guys they've gotten. They've gotten some guys with really big-time offers, beating out schools like Oklahoma and Florida State. That's impressive. And I think that's a positive because I think that one thing these recruits are seeing is the ability or the potential to play early. And that's something that's important. If they can really sell that, I think that'll help them replenish things a lot more quickly.
Now, in your opinion, what do you think it's going to take for Louisville to get in a top 25 recruiting class?
Well, I think winning games is always an important part. It's really hard to recruit guys if you're not winning. But I think, one thing that I've seen with the staff that I really like, and I think that is going to help long term, is that they're really swinging for the fences. They're not really backing down from those top players. And I think it's one thing that's to just offer a guy. It's another thing to actually aggressively recruit a guy.
Yeah.
You can give out all the offers in the world. If you're not actually recruiting those players, all they're doing is tweeting out that, hey, I got an offer. But they're not backing down from these guys that are getting offers from the Floridas of the world, the Oklahomas, the Ohio States. They feel like they belong just like anybody else. And I think that's important because as you start building those relationships with those guys earlier and earlier, which is what they do, you're starting to recruit guys now for next year. When you get that ball rolling and you're winning games and you're constantly communicating and you have that relationship, that's what factors in when you think of what's underneath the logo, so to speak. When you look at a recruit, they're going to look at, hey, I want to play for the top program. Well, what's next on the list is I want to have a good relationship with the coaches. I want to play somewhere where, hey, I like this coach. I want to play for this guy. And I think that's where they're better. I think that's where they're best, I guess. So I think winning is obviously the number one thing. I think having guys that get drafted is important. Guys want to play in the NFL. And I think other than that, you got to have guys that, they're the names. Tutu Atwell should probably lead to them getting better receivers. Des Fitzpatrick, the same. Those guys make highlight plays. Their names are mentioned, around the country. That you see their highlights and whatnot. You see a guy like Mekhi Becton getting all this pub. Offensive linemen notice those things. There's a reason why Iowa gets a lot of good offensive linemen because they keep putting offensive linemen in the NFL, and everyone knows that Iowa's good offensive linemen. Yeah. Louisville has to find that in ways, and I think that's one thing as a program they didn't do very well under Petrino. They didn't necessarily take advantage of their star players and then bring in other guys. The next, guys won the Thorpe Award. Hey, should not be able to go there too. They didn't take advantage of that, so I think that'll be a thing. Can they take advantage of these guys becoming stars and then build on that in the recruiting standpoint?
So the next game is against Syracuse at home at the Carrier Dome, or well, not our home, but Syracuse's home, on October 3rd, possibly. What is your perspective about Syracuse?
I think Syracuse was supposed to be really good last year, and they ended up just having a really down season. They made some changes on their end. Also, they changed their defensive coordinator. They're gonna have a completely new defensive system. Really, really interested to see how that works out for them. It's really funny because 2 years ago, their defensive coordinator at the time, Brian Ward, was up for the Broyles Award. He was a I guess a semifinalist and they had started off that season really good on defense, and then they just absolutely cratered. And then last year they were just as bad, and he ended up getting fired. So going from a Broyles Award semifinalist to being out in the corner, it's pretty hard to do, but he pulled it off. So they really wanted a specific system, and they went after it. It's kind of like I believe it's a 3-3-5 or something like that, and it's a specific system that Rocky Long, an old coach, really got to develop. And they finally got their guy. They're going to have that system. Dino Babers seems to think that that's going to be the winning formula. But I think his offense really kind of left a lot to be desired last year. They had a lot of offensive line issues, led the nation in sacks given up. I think tackles for loss also. So they have a lot of guys coming back, though. I think if they can work on their offense, I think if their defense steps up to the plate, they've got a couple really good players on their defense side of the ball. Andre Sisco was a freshman All-American 2 years ago. They've got Michael Jones, who's a 4-star guy that I know Louisville Recruiting. Some of the other top ACC schools, guy from Florida. They've got some talent there. I still don't know that they put it back together like it was 2 years ago when they almost knocked off Clemson. I think they're still going to struggle. I don't think that Louisville will have an issue with them. I think they'll be better than last year, but I think that's a win for Louisville. At least right now, I think so.
I definitely see that as a win for Louisville. So we move on to Game 6, I believe, which is at Boston College on October 10th. Now, what's your perspective on Boston College, especially with their new coach, Hafley?
Yeah, came over from Ohio State, who's their defensive coordinator. I think that, the big thing with them kind of other schools is they just have these changeovers. When you have new coaches, there's so much you don't know until you get on the field and start seeing things. And BC, I think they've always overachieved. Dazio, that's one of the reasons why Boston College fans, I think, really just couldn't stand the guys because they were always kind of at the same level, and they probably didn't even belong there. They won games that, hey, they shouldn't win. I think the thing about them is they just haven't really recruited a lot of great talent there. As of right now, they have a former walk-on playing quarterback. Ended up playing against Louisville last year after they lost their starter. They're hoping that they can get Phil Jerkovic, who is a transfer from Notre Dame. They're hoping to get a waiver. I don't think that he will get it because he's not from Boston, and typically you need to have those. You have to have those hard reasons of why you need to transfer. So if you're talking about playing with a former walk-on quarterback, you lose A.J. Dillon. You don't really have a lot of options at wide receiver. What do you do on offense? And we saw that they used to just run the ball nonstop with their old offense.
A.J. Dillon just did nothing but run. I mean,
right.
I can't even tell you who the quarterback was because that's all they did was give the ball to A.J. Dillon. He's off. And
they just didn't really have a lot around him. So, I really question whether or not their offense is just going to be able to take off. And then on the defense side of the ball, they typically rely on a lot of one guy at each level. And they have maybe a good middle linebacker and maybe one good corner. Well, I don't know if they have that this year coming up. So they were really bad as a pass rushing team last year. I don't see that changing. I think long term, I think he's already recruiting better than they were before. But I think BC might be the worst team in the division. I think they might have a Syracuse type of year where you're just watching. It's like, how are they this bad? They just haven't recruited very well, and I don't know that he has enough to work with to have a Scott Satterfield type of year where you come in and you can turn things around quickly.
So you believe Louisville's going to beat Boston College?
Yeah, I think so. I'd be kind of surprised if Boston College somehow another turns around really quickly. I just don't think they have the talent to work with. I think it'll be, I think long term they're going to be better, but I think starting off is going to start off slow up there.
So the next game is going to be at home for Louisville, and it's going to be against Florida State Seminoles. What's your opinion on this?
It's kind of crazy, it feels kind of broken record, but it's like, hey, new coaches, still don't know how it's going to go. Florida State has better talent, obviously, than a Boston College, or an NC State who's having their coordinator changes. But I think I think that Louisville stacks up well. I think last year was a game that Louisville had to win, and then obviously a turnover leads to one thing, and next thing you know, they lost that game when they had it won. So I think that I like Mike Norvell as a coach. I watched plenty of Memphis games because that offense was just fun to watch. They had guys putting up ridiculous stats, and you watch those Thursday night games and Friday night games that they play. It's just fun. I think they have some of those guys down in Florida State. The offensive line and quarterback questions are still there. James Blackman was super inconsistent last year. Young guys, class who flipped from Louisville. They've got Jordan Travis, who also transferred from Louisville, who did a really good job running the ball down there, but didn't really pass the ball very well. So if they can get their quarterback play figured out, their offensive line, which has been terrible for years down there, they obviously have skill position guys because they're in Florida. They're going to get talent out there. Their defense, they brought back their entire defensive line. That is going to be the key because they played Louisville really well last year. They plugged up the running game. They got after the quarterback. So I think it's going to be close. It's one of the games I consider kind of a toss-up. But I think that Louisville has an advantage because going into year two, they have most of their guys coming back. Those guys have played Florida State before. Their coaches know what they're looking for. I think that's going to be a plus for them because that's the whole thing of the whole season. Can this staff being here for the second year help Louisville take that next step? And I think if they take that next step, then they should be able to beat a team like Florida State. One thing, though, also to keep in mind, playing at home, like you pointed out, is that Louisville should be in good shape from a record standpoint. They should be coming off of win after win after win. Off of a bye week, you should have a very nice crowd at home. Obviously, if things work out for the season and we play when they're supposed to play, and there's actually a bye week, you should have a big crowd. You should have fans really there, and I think that's the energy for the program, for the team, should be at a really high level, and I think that plays another factor as well. I think when these guys are playing with confidence, I think when you got a winning record, you have a potential of saying, hey, we can potentially all you need is Clemson to stub their toe once or twice, or potentially still saying, hey, we can get into a New Year's Six bowl even with a Clemson loss. That's something to play for. That's different, and we all saw the videos in the after the game in the locker room with Scott Satterfield. He really builds these guys up. He doesn't want these guys to just go out there and try to do their best. He expects them to win every game, and I think if they're playing with that confidence, if they're 5-1 at the time, I think that could really lead to a different type of atmosphere that can help them, in that game. So probably something I should have pointed out before NC State, because it's been something that's on my mind. If we look at, say this thing plays out and they actually play the season on time, we're looking at potentially sometime in July or August probably is when they're going to finally allow coaches to practice. And it might be depending on state-by-state rules, but the goal is to have a uniform thing for everybody. So the uniform is going to be 6 weeks is what they're going to have to lead up into the season.
Okay.
So if you look at what Louisville was able to do, they got 2.5 weeks of practice in the spring, a bunch of their freshmen in, they were healthy for the most part. So they got to see, they got those extra practices in. If you're looking at a school that has a new coach, new coaching staff, whatever it may be, they're at a disadvantage already because they don't have spring practice to work with. Yeah. So all they're going to have is that 6-week period to decide, to put in all of their scheme, to install their offense, install their defense, to evaluate their entire team and say, okay, these are my guys. Think about it this way. Think if Louisville didn't have the time to figure out Marshawn Ford was going to be Marshawn Ford last year. I mean, that happened in spring practice. Yeah. So you look at a guy that led the ACC and ACC tight ends and touchdowns. If they didn't have that opportunity to figure that out in the spring, they might not have ever noticed it. Or they might not have noticed it until the fall, and now you can't plan around that guy. Or you look at Tyler Haycraft, a guy who hadn't played before, who they figured out in the spring that, hey, this guy can be our starting right tackle. A lot of those things, it kind of gets undervalued because spring practice just seems like spring practice. Yeah. But for the coaches, that's where you see who is going to step up, especially when you have a new coaching situation. That's when you evaluate your roster, and then you figure out over the summer who are you putting where, and in that way, when you start up in the fall, you know what you're doing. All of those teams are going to have to start from scratch when those 6 weeks happen, and depending on where you are, if they don't make it uniform start date, which I don't think they will, and the only thing that's going to be uniform is that 6-week period, and some of those schools it might not start until right before the season starts. So you're talking about a potential for some of those schools to be at a real disadvantage And you know, it might take until okay, who's our quarterback? You know, who are we starting here? Who are we starting there? So it's really interesting, and we'll have to see what happens.
FSU's first game, I think it's going to be a little crazy,
Yeah.
honestly. And I think it might be kind of fun to watch. Not in a kind of, hoping that they fail, completely. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see, implementing Mike Norvell's scheme with 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And, because Mike Norvell loves using tight ends. That was one of the things I did in Memphis that, they were able to do really well was utilize those tight ends and, be able to make holes and make plays because they had strong guys up front. All right, so after Florida State, we play Virginia Tech at home. What are your thoughts on Virginia Tech? Last season, they did pretty good, but completely flopped during the UK game.
Yeah, I mean they're such a weirdly inconsistent program. You know, they'll come out and really beat a good team, and then the next week they'll play terrible against a bad team. And it's really hard to understand. They've as a program they've lost a lot of players. Justin Fuente's been down there for a while now. When he took over for Frank, not Frank, so it was Frank Beamer. And I think that, early on they lost some guys that were maybe, kind of part of that downfall that Virginia Tech kind of had a backslide towards his career, but he's also lost some guys that he's recruited himself. So it seems very odd. They were able to get a couple good recruits in. They got some transfers in. They've got Khalil Herbert coming in to play running back. He was at Kansas and actually was pretty good. Kansas doesn't have a great program. He was one of their better players. They got a kid from Rutgers who's also their best player. So they got a couple guys that can come in and help their offense. Their defense is going to have a new defense coordinator for the first time in, I think it's 35 years. I think it's how long Bud Foster was down there. Yeah. So they got a guy, former Foster player, a guy that has been there for a couple years and was helping coach the secondary. He's now their new defense coordinator. That's a big question mark, obviously. But they've got talent. They've got a lot of really good players on defense. Caleb Farley might be the best cornerback in the country. He decided to come back to school. And when you see guys like that, and you it's just like any other school. When you have certain players that might be able to take away something that Louisville does, it kind of gives you something to kind of keep in mind. And you got Des Fitzpatrick who plays out wide. If they're able to maybe put Farley on him and they can kind of neutralize him, that takes away one of your options. So you look at things like that, and I think that, they have some of those guys. The quarterback situation is kind of interesting there. But they've got some players, and I think that Fuente is a good coach, and, we'll have to see what happens.
All right, so up next would be Virginia. What's your opinion on Virginia, and especially losing their star quarterback to the NFL, Bryce Perkins?
Yeah, Virginia is such an interesting team because I think they've got some guys coming back on offense. They lost their top two receivers as well as Perkins, but they have Terrell Jana coming back. He actually had a really good game against Louisville. Really came on late in the year. They got some younger receivers that I think they've recruited fairly well there. They recruit in a way that's really interesting because they get a guy here or there, and they don't recruit to the point where they're losing guys early. They redshirt a lot of guys, so they replace guys a little bit easier than maybe a Boston College or maybe even a Syracuse. So it's really interesting. So they should have some receivers coming up. They've got a transfer running back from IU that's really good, and they have a guy who's going to be a sophomore. Can't remember his name all the time, but he had an Alabama offer and passed up Alabama to play running back in Virginia. They didn't play him very much, but he's an option, and I think he's a good player.
Yeah,
I watched him play in a handful of the games that he did play. So they have some options. They just have to figure out that quarterback spot. Well, they got Keaton Thompson, Mississippi State's quarterback. He transferred into Virginia. People remember when Mississippi State, when Louisville played them back when Lamar Jackson, what was it, the Belk Bowl maybe a couple years ago, and they lost to Mississippi State. They lost to Keaton Thompson. So he was a freshman then at MSU. He's there now. I think he's really good. I think he's a talented player. I'm surprised that he didn't play this past year. But he's a grad transfer. He'll be able to play. So their offense is going to be so interesting because you lose a guy like Bryce Perkins. It's like losing a Lamar Jackson. He meant so much to your offense. How do you replace that? Well, bringing in a guy like Keaton Thompson has to feel good. And then on defense, they're going to be fine. They're almost like Clemson to me. Their scheme is so good, and they recruit fit so well. And Bronco Mendenhall is a great defensive coach. Their defense should be perfectly fine, and they got some really talented guys there. So it's a little bit more of a toss-up, but coming after last year, Keaton Thompson really changed my opinion. I thought this was an easy win for Louisville because they didn't have a quarterback. But if he's able to come in and really learn that offense, by that time of the season, he should be comfortable with the offense if he's playing well and he's still the guy. It's a little bit more of a toss-up, but I always feel good. I think Louisville handles Virginia really well, and I think they've had their number the last couple of years. I'd call it a win. I think, like I said, I think they've played them really well the last couple of years, and I think it's really relying on one thing, and even if their quarterback play is really good, with Bryce Perkins, they were able to beat that team with Bryce Perkins. I don't know that Thompson's a better player than Perkins was, so I don't think they should be able to beat him like they did last year.
So I think that's going to be a tough game, especially on the road. But it'll be interesting to say the least. So next up is Wake Forest at Louisville.
I'm bullish. I like Wake. It's weird. I always end up taking up for Wake because I don't know why. They're kind of like the plucky underdog. And they, the last few years, Wake has gone to a bowl game. They've had winning seasons, and I don't think they ever get credit for it. They're never really great, but they're not nearly as bad as people maybe kind of make them out to be. They're always kind of consistently around that 500 plus. But I think the thing with Wake every year for me that I worry about is their defense has kind of regressed every year. A few years back, they had Mike Elko as their defensive coordinator. Mike Elko is now the second or third highest paid defensive coordinator in the country. So when you have a guy like that and he leaves, he ended up going to Notre Dame. Now he's at Texas A&M. And he's regarded as a really good defensive coordinator. Well, since he's left, their defense has kind of taken a step back each year, obviously because you lose a great coach like that. But then they're not able to recruit like everyone else is. It's Wake Forest. They're going to be down at the bottom of the conference in recruiting every year. But they find guys that fit what they do. And I think that next year, I think their offense is going to be fine. They lost Jamie Newman to Georgia. I think the kid that they have there played the year before, and he played well. I think they've got great skill position guys. Sage Surratt, we saw what he did against Louisville. They've got their first 4-star recruit that they got was 2 years ago. He actually finished the year there and played really well when he had to play. What was his name? Played outstanding. So now that you've got 2 or 3 really good receivers out there in that offense that they run, that we know as Louisville fans, we know better than anybody how well that offense when they're running really fast, they're doing all that stuff. So I think their offense is going to be good. Louisville will have to win a shootout like they did last year, and I think they'll be better off this year. I think that Wake's defense is going to take a much bigger step back. They bring back Carlos Basham, who's a really good defensive end. But outside of that, they lost everybody. Their secondary, they lost all their starters. A couple of those guys went to the NFL. They lost their star middle linebacker. He's playing in the NFL. They had a lot of NFL talent on that defense. They're all gone now. And they don't have guys that can just replenish them. So I think Louisville wins that game, but I think that Wake's offense, I think it'll be another shootout just like it was last year.
Yeah, no, losing Jamie Newman I thought was the biggest blow. And losing the defensive linemen and those defensive players who went to the NFL, I mean, that's going to be a big blow too. But Jamie Newman deciding to get in the transfer portal and go to Georgia, I'm excited to see him at Georgia, honestly. Yeah. I mean, he did great things when he played against Louisville, and I just think that, hopefully, I mean, who knows? Who knows what he'll do at Georgia? Who knows if he'll be a starter or a backup? But, I'm still excited to see him play this coming season. So the next game is going to be at Notre Dame. All right, so we're going to be at the Fighting Irish. What's your take on Notre Dame?
So here's I guess my hot take. I guess I think that Louisville is going to beat Notre Dame.
Really?
I think that Notre Dame has so many question marks. First off, I guess I should go back to last year. I think that if Louisville played Notre Dame later in the season last year, they would have beat Notre Dame last year. I've watched that game God knows how many times because it was a fun game to watch, and it was really interesting to see how Louisville went from that team to where they were at the end of the year. So I kind of went back to see how they improved. And when you really go back and look at that game, from an offensive standpoint, Louisville had no clue how to throw the ball yet. And I've kind of pointed out, it took until kind of that Western Kentucky game for them to really get the offense going how it should have gone.
Yeah.
So they were really one-dimensional offense, which we know by the end of the year they weren't, and they definitely won't be next year. And I think on the defensive side of the ball, both they didn't know what they really had, so they kind of just did what they thought would work. And Brian Brown just kind of brought the hammer nonstop. He was trying to stop the run and try to get out to the quarterback. and they really did well to stop their passing game, and they actually handled that offense pretty well. Notre Dame is losing a lot of guys. They're going to be one of the younger teams that Louisville plays. And on offense, that's not necessarily bad. They have some more skilled guys that are a little bit better, more talented. On defense, it's going to be bad for them. They were bad they had a lot of talent deficiencies on defense before. I think it's just going to get worse. They're losing a couple of secondary guys, a couple of linebackers, a couple of defensive linemen. And they're really going to be relying on a couple guys on defense to make all the plays. And I don't think you can do that against a Louisville offense.
Well, you're actually one of the first people I've heard who's actually forecasted for Louisville to beat Notre Dame. A lot of people, they have shown promise, over the past 4 years, but they're missing some key crucial things. And I think you're right. I think defense really does need to be a big narrative to Notre Dame. And honestly, I really wish Louisville does win that game. I think that will be a really great turnaround for the program, especially being able to play against a national ranked team.
Well, yeah, and I think you kind of know that there. You talked about how Notre Dame seems to always be missing something. It's kind of where their issue is. They're always, this past year on offense, they had Ian Book's a really good quarterback. They have this really good offensive line that played really well. Their running backs are just kind of okay. They have Chase Claypool's a really good wide receiver. They don't have anybody else at wide receiver. They had an injury. They had a guy that was suspended, and next thing you know, they don't have another receiver. Well, Notre Dame shouldn't have that problem, right? They should be able to recruit at the level where a man goes down, they just put in another four-star guy. Yeah. They haven't really been able to recruit at that level across the entire board. They're getting really good quarterbacks, really good tight ends. I mean, they got the number one tight end in the country in this past class. He'll probably be starting for them this year. Michael Mayer from up in the Highlands. So they're getting guys at certain positions, but they're not able to really spread that around their entire team. And that's where their issues come in. That's where when you look at – and I think the main thing for me is I think Louisville's offense is going to be really, really in a good position to really do well on their defense. They don't have a lot of good linebackers, and they don't have good corners, or at least they don't have experienced guys there. So when you go against that, you look at what's Louisville's strong point. It's their running game, where your linebackers have to kind of be good to stop their running game, and your corners have to keep up with guys like Dez and Tutu and things like that. Well, if you can take advantage of that, which I think they can against Notre Dame, you got a chance to win. And that's why I really do, in my heart of hearts, think that if they played them at the end of last season, I think they would have beaten Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, definitely.
They almost beat them in that first game, really. If you go back and watch it, starting the second half, it was a close game, and then they were able to pull away. The turnovers happened and things like that. And, I think Louisville's a lot better about protecting the football now. You look at how Mikael Cunningham played at the end of last year. Didn't turn the ball over nearly as much. They won more games. Kind of simple, but, I think that's kind of where I'm looking at it for the next year.
No, yeah, definitely. And I mean, one of the things I noticed during that game was towards the third and fourth quarter, there was a lot of wear and tear. There's just not enough depth. And these, first string players are not able to stay in for 2 hours straight, getting beat constantly, and you're being able to cycle in guys on the other side. And I think this year is going to be a little bit better. I think we're adding a lot more depth. I think we're going to see a lot of freshmen playing.
Yep.
All right. There's going to be probably, those 25 guys that we're getting in, they're probably all going to play. They're all probably going to play, especially the guys from last season or last recruiting class.
You're going to see a lot of youth. Yeah. They're going to play those guys because at the end of the day, you can't just go out there and just hope that the starters are able to just do it. We saw that they can't do that. And they didn't have that depth because they didn't have the guys that fit what they do. Now you have a recruiting class and a half, essentially, because that first class was a small class, and it was really your first class you're going to bring in who you can get. And now you have a bunch of guys, 30, 40 guys on your roster now that you have picked to come and play here because you feel like they fit with what you do. So you're going to have guys that maybe weren't going to be relied on like maybe a Henry Bryant or Darian Boykin or Jamie Vance. And some of those guys you might say in a previous situation, you might say, well, we can sit these guys. Yeah. We don't really need them to play. Now that's not an option. You're going to come, you're going to play. You're not going to start maybe, but you're going to be a guy in the rotation. You're going to be a guy that in this third quarter, fourth quarter, you're going to have to be on the field. And to be honest, and some of these guys have the talent that should be perfectly fine. And when it comes down to it, it's not an option. You gotta win games. And the only way we saw, you're 100% right. The Notre Dame game, you look at the UK game, you look at Miami, all these games. When things kind of start going, you don't have anybody else to throw out there. Mm-hmm. Guys get tired, guys get run down. I think we saw the opposite of that against Mississippi State when they had time to rest those guys. And then they came out and they kind of had the same we really saw in the first and the last game of the season kind of how Brian Brown's scheme works. It is a hammer. Mm-hmm. They're going to bring guys. They want to be aggressive. They're going to blitz. They're going to fly. Guys are flying around the field. And we saw how it worked against Mississippi State. And in some points in a Notre Dame game, we saw the same thing. So we saw some of the potential of that defense. I don't think we will see it fully the way that it's supposed to look until some of this season and really in year 3, when they actually have a full defensive guy that they want. Because when you're playing that hard, that aggressive, you got to give guys a rest, and they just didn't have that option sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be a very interesting season, to say the least. I'm very excited to see a couple of players. One of the first players I'm excited to see is Adonis Boone on offensive tackle. I think he's going to be left tackle. And he's definitely going to be a starter, filling in for Mackay, who's now in the Jets, off to the Jets. I guess he has to go to training camp in a couple weeks or a couple months. I'm not sure what their situation is, with the pro styles. But Adonis Boone is really going to stand out. I think Renato Brown is going to be the second. I mean, Renato has gained a lot of weight. I think he's going to be really great at guard. And let's see, there's 2 others that I'm really high on. Zay Peterson, Yaya Diaby. So Yaya's on my list. And so is the freshman Marquis Lowry, who is at corner. Yeah. I saw some of his footage that he posted from spring practice that I don't know if he got permission to post. But honestly, he is an exceptional corner, and I think has the potential to be a starter, to fill that corner. Now, Louisville has suffered greatly at corner. We've been putting in safeties, free safeties in corner, and we haven't actually had guys at that skill position. We've been substituting guys who may have played that in high school, but one of the key things I think Scott Satterfield was focused on was getting in actual position players who know what they're doing, as opposed to having to teach these other position players, hey, can you do this?
Yeah.
It's been crazy on defense, and I think going forward it's going to get a lot better. So the last game is UK at Louisville. What are your thoughts on that? Or do you think it's going to be another steamroll again if we get another monsoon? Or
no? I think I watched that UK game a couple times and kind of try to figure out kind of what all happened. And I think one thing with UK, and going into that game, I had some time to really watch all of their games that year. I wasn't really too confident that Louisville was going to be able to stop their offense. And I think that's, I think the rivalry plays a lot, but I think a lot of people just kind of really thought that UK's offense wasn't any good because they had Lynn Bowden playing quarterback. But when you watch their games, they did Louisville a lot worse than they did most teams, but they were doing that stuff against everybody, and they were winning a lot of games. And I think that it was just really hard for people to handle it because it's a big game, it's a hard game. But I don't think that their offense is going to be able to adjust. I mean, they're going to be going back to what they normally do on offense, and they lost their best player on offense, and really their only player on offense. So if they're out there starting Terry Wilson again at quarterback, and they still don't have really a lot of great receivers. They don't have a lot of skill position options. They're going to be a run first team. Yeah. I think that it's going to be back to maybe a more of a normal game. Kentucky's defense is good. They're bringing back pretty much everybody on defense, and they've got some young guys that'll be able to play more. So I think their defense is going to be the interesting part. I think they handled Louisville's offense pretty well last year. Kentucky's defense is a keep everything in front of you defense. So when you have Louisville and their big play offense, that somebody's got to win that battle. And last year Kentucky won it. I don't know that there's anything that makes me think that Louisville's going to be able to just say, hey, we figured you out. So I think it's going to be, can Louisville's defense stop Kentucky's offense? And I think they could. I think they can. I don't see them being anywhere near what they were able to do last year. So it's a toss-up game. But I think if, when you're looking at that, a potential home game, if they're coming off a Notre Dame win, I think that's something that I would say that Louisville has a very good chance of winning. But it wouldn't shock me at all if they dropped the game to Kentucky. I think it's really the most evenly split game on the entire schedule, in my opinion.
No, definitely. UK actually just brought in a transfer quarterback to fill that quarterback issue.
Their quarterback situation was so weird last year, also because they just didn't even have confidence in the guys that were healthy. So it was such an odd thing. And they did get Joey Gatewood, a former 4-star, 5-star kid. I'll say this without saying I don't like downing players. I try not to, but Joey Gatewood is a tight end playing quarterback, in my opinion. I don't think he's the answer for them. He also needs a waiver. I don't think he's going to get a waiver to play. But I don't think I think there's an excitement there. Anytime you get a 5-star player, I don't blame any UK fan for being super excited for getting a guy who chose to go to Auburn, had offers from everybody. But there's a reason why he didn't play at Auburn. It's not because it's not because, the guy that came in was just way better. He just wasn't. He's just not a very good quarterback. He wasn't a really good thrower. He was listed as an athlete in high school by some of the recruiting services and they do that typically when you have a quarterback who plays quarterback for his high school, but probably should be playing tight end, wide receiver, defensive end, something like that. So I think that if they can coach him up, great. But I don't know if he's the answer. So I think we'll be seeing Terry Wilson if he's healthy. I think Terry Wilson's a good player.
Oh, yeah.
But he's very inconsistent when it comes to throwing the football. And they also don't have dynamic wide receivers. Lynn Bowden was that guy. And now that he's gone, Lynn Bowden, I always say his name wrong. I think now that he's gone, they have to find a guy. And I don't know if they have that guy right now. They have some young guys I think are talented, but they don't have anyone who has ever shown that I can be a big-time receiver that they can rely on. And if you don't have that, then you become one-dimensional. And being one-dimensional with Lynn Bowden is one thing. Being one-dimensional with I don't know if that offense is going to be as powerful as they were.
I definitely agree. But for the most part, Keith, that kind of wraps up the entire season for Louisville. One of the last couple things we wanted to find out was who is your top players?
Kind of looking, I guess, maybe both sides of the ball. On offense, I think that, I think Des Fitzpatrick is going to have a much better season. I think, and I kind of keep harping back to this, but Scott Satterfield kind of keeps pointing out too, and it's always stuck with me, is that they really felt going in that Notre Dame game, they just didn't even know what they had to work with. And they just kind of, I think it was really, I love hearing him talk about it because as a fan, you can tell the moment that he had the same moment that we did. When Javian Hawkins had that long run early in the game, I think in his head, he's like, oh, okay, we got something to work with. And I remember sitting there, it's like, okay, this is unexpected. Okay, this guy who didn't play last year, surprise starter, and like, okay, these guys know what they're doing because they figured out that you've got this running back that they can work with. They got, Marshawn Ford made a play here. And I'm like, okay, these guys maybe found something. And I think they were in the same boat. It took them almost a quarter of the season, almost half the season to figure out that Des Fitzpatrick is as good as he is. And I think that going into next year, it's not going to be as much of a focus on Tutu Atwell as much as it's going to be maybe both those guys and maybe spreading things around a little bit. And I think Des Fitzpatrick is determined to make sure his draft stock is where he wants it to be. I think he's motivated. I think he's going to have that opportunity to do really well. From a freshman standpoint, I think Christian Fitzpatrick will also play. But the guy that I'm really excited about to see is Jordan Watkins. He's got that, kind of ridiculous track speed that really shows up when he plays. Some guys can run fast, but when they put the pads on, not really as fast. I think Jordan Watkins is a real speed burner. And I think they'll find ways to make sure they put him in the game in some ways and some forms. So he's a guy I'm really excited on offense. On defense, I think the young guy that I'm really, really excited about is Cam Wilson. I think he'll probably see the field. I think he actually might push for a starting spot at outside linebacker. That kid's going to be a stud. I think he's going to be one of the best players out of the class. And I think he's going to be the guy that when we look back at when Satterfield got here in the first first few big players they got in as recruits, I think Cam Wilson will be a guy that we really focus on. And I'm really I'm looking forward to see what Chandler Jones does at cornerback. I think he's really improved. I was pretty down on him as a freshman. I'll be honest. He was a pretty highly rated recruit. He was an Under Armour All-American, I think.
Yeah.
I was never really sold on him personally, but I think this past year, getting the right coaching, getting Brian Brown to get with him every day, he really showed that he can play. I think he had 10 pass breakups last year. I think he's going to have a really good year, and I think he's going to be able to be kind of a shutdown guy on his side of the field, which should help the whole defense.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Now, I had mentioned Zay Peterson and Marquis Lowry and who else was it? And what was Adonis Boone and Renato Brown.
Mm-hmm.
One of the others I forgot who I'm really looking forward to is Brandon Smith. I think he was I think he was a JUCO product out of Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And, they had actually mentioned that he had a ton of speed during spring practice. So honestly, I'm excited to see what he can bring to the table with Christian Fitzpatrick. And, but, I'm really surprised you said Jordan Watkins. I really, I haven't seen any footage from spring practice of him. I did not know that he was a huge track star.
Well, he's a track. I mean, I call it
star.
He's a guy that ran a 4.38 down in Nashville during one of those rivals camps last year. And that really that's when his recruitment kind of started to pick up. And I think that, one thing you can't really, you can't teach speed, as they say. And he's also got kind of great size. He's right around 6 foot, right around 195 pounds. So he's got good size, and he should be able to play inside or outside because he has decent size. But then he has a speed to really do some of those things they do with Tutu, where he can run those speed sweeps and things like that. I think he's a guy that, because Tutu's there, he won't be the return guy. But I think, it's not just this coming year. You got, thinking down the road, you have a guy that could potentially replace Tutu as a return guy. Replace Rajay Burns as that punt returner or Tutu, and then maybe kick returns when Hassan Hall moves on. So, I think he has a really good potential from a career standpoint, but I think early on, the one thing that helps guys get on the field on offense the most quickly is being able to run. Yeah. And he can run. So I really think that he's a guy that can potentially try to find ways to get involved with the offense because they don't really need a lot of help on offense. I mean, they don't need a guy to come in and be a breakout guy. But I do think that that's also a plus for these freshmen because now it's, hey, can we find specific plays that, we put this guy in just to do this one or two things. And I think that's where he can potentially make an impact.
All right. Well, we're really excited to see if there is going to be season and if there isn't, and what the likelihood of empty stands or even divided seats amongst the fans. That'll be real interesting to see. One fan per every 2 seats.
I'm up for whatever they decide to do. If it means that we get to watch football, I'm all for it. But hopefully they can find a way to make sure everybody's safe, including the players and the staff and all that. Those guys have to. Whether it be testing and all that, who knows what they'll do. But, if they do something that's safe and allows us to watch football, I'm all for it, man.
Yeah, no, I'm all for it as well. I'm ready for football, ready to go down there and see the fall camps and all that. Well, Keith, we really appreciate you coming on Cardinal Craze and telling us your thoughts and telling us your rundown and what you think about the upcoming season and how it's going to go. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, thanks for coming out on the show. This has been Cardinal Craze. Have a good one. Go Cards.
Thank you.